Hey
Day.
Anna, good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for joining, right after Christmas. You must be busy and hopefully you've had the time of your life.
Yeah, it's been good.
Um,
It's a slow week in between the holidays and New Year's, so it's been
yeah,
good.
great, great. Okay, well, thank you for joining. And Philip is the founder of Contraption Company with a very interesting background. You started building your products very early, right? And for example, Moonlight reached 50K ARR before being acquired, right? Let's maybe start with that. What is Moonlight?
Yeah, so Moonlight is a marketplace. The idea was that you could hire software engineers for really high skill, short term work. Um, the insight was that my previous company, prior to that, Staffjoy, we had a lot of trouble hiring. And we were doing kind of the traditional San Francisco thing where we had an office and we wanted full time employees. And early on, we started to recognize some of the benefits of remote work and also of kind of contractors. And so Moonlight started as a way to make that process easier of hiring short term remote contractors. And the main insight behind it was that there's a lot of like really high skill people that were looking for that kind of work. I think prior to Moonlight, like Upwork was kind of known as more of a free for all, kind of a mix of different skills and locations and things like that. And Moonlight was, well over half US based people looking for freelance and remote positions. So we were really early kind of in trying to get people to make remote hires. I know it sounds kind of crazy now, but
Yeah.
we get on the phone with companies and they'd say, but like, we don't want remote. We want them to come to the office. So I go, no, that's not the future. And then we sold the company in January 2020. And then in February 2020, things went way more remote than they'd ever
Yeah.
done in the past. And that company is still active. It got bought by a Y Combinator company called Pull Request, which then got acquired by HackerOne. And then actually Moonlight's top customer just took over the platform. So it's continuing to operate at moonlightwork.com.
Right, that's awesome. But like you said, it was a bit of a challenge to market it at first. So what did you look for? Like maybe you researched a bit of a Upwork experience or how they did things. So how did you go to market eventually?
Yeah, it was kind of everything all at once in some ways. One of the things that's tough when you're building a company is having a vision for the future, but having to reconcile it with how people behave today. And I see this with products that I work on, every day. It's like you have this vision for the future. Like we think people will be remote and, flexible workers. And then you bring it to the present and realize that people have not yet adapted that behavior. And so it can be difficult to bridge the two. And what we found as a way to bridge it with Moonlight was the idea of contract to hire work. And so what that meant was we had these engineers who were really interested in freelance remote work. And we had these hiring managers who weren't necessarily bought into freelance and remote work, but they wanted full-time employees. And what we found was a way to reconcile the two was contracts to hire for engineering managers, saying that you should just try hiring them as freelance. And eventually, if it works out, maybe you can bring them on full-time. And that we did see like a high percentage of jobs convert to full-time work. And that was probably just based on the timing. But that was really an unlock to get more budget from hiring managers back before the pandemic.
Right. Okay. And as far as I know, you started with a no-code solution, something very simple, and you grew out of a community. And a community is a big word in 2022, right? Everyone wants a community. Not a lot of people really understands what it means and how it works. So, what was the community for you?
Yeah, I think a lot of the community for Moonlight came from the fact that we were building something that engineers wanted. And the tough part about building a marketplace is you have two sides to the marketplace. You had, for us, the engineers who were looking for work, and you had the companies that were hiring. And we had built something that the engineers really wanted, and that's where a lot of the community came from. It was definitely harder for Moonlight. Our constant challenge was getting companies to hire through the platform. But the community really, I think, came from building something that people wanted. The low-code original site, I think, was on Squarespace, and we put up a landing page, and we had a mix of forms and things. We did our first, $100,000 in sales just on spreadsheets and running things manually, which was really great because you can iterate really quickly. As soon as you start to put things in code, it becomes harder to change your decisions, and it becomes more expensive to change decisions, change email copy, change user flows, things like that. So it was really great to start off with low code. And the community, I think, really came from just mentioning Moonlight in some different comments online and people really reacting positively to it. We eventually set up a Slack for everybody that was in it, and that ended up being kind of like more of the home of the community. But I think one of the superpowers of Moonlight that a lot of companies don't do was just a really thoughtful weekly newsletter. And that newsletter was kind of like a key part of the product. We had, more people would look at our newsletter than our website every week. And so for a lot of people, the email was the product. So that's definitely like a piece of advice I'd have for anyone who's building a community is, yes, like Slack or whatever the modern equivalents might be, like Discord can be useful, but they really reward the most active users, and you can miss out on the group of users who are somewhat engaged but don't want to sit in Slack all day on your community by using something more asynchronous like an email newsletter.
Right. It's really interesting, actually, especially for me, because at Mars, we're also building a community, and we do have a newsletter. And a lot of things that we hear is that newsletters are dead, nobody wants a newsletter, and developers tend to just neglect their email, their inbox. So how did it work for you? How did you make sure that it was engaging in a way that, people still wanted to open it?
Yeah. A key part was making sure it was authentic to the Moonlight brand. And so we weren't just trying to have a newsletter to have a newsletter. Like, it didn't feel like a marketing tool. It was really just an extension of the brand. We were talking about remote work, about the vision of the future that we were painting. And over time, we ended up customizing it per user. So you had your job matches for that week, or your, developer matches for that week. And so we put a lot of engineering effort into making it really customized and powerful. So part of it was just making sure it was really genuine. Like, it didn't feel like a marketing tool. We didn't have like fancy templates or anything. It was mostly just like text. And we would, as the founders, write the introduction to the email like by hand every week. And it was like a really key part of the brand. Other ideas on newsletters. Yeah, I think the authenticity is really just like the key part in terms of how to get into people's, inboxes. That's a, difficult thing. If you have to earn that trust. So I think the biggest thing is making something that people want and giving them action there. But why it was so important for us is hiring a developer or getting a job is such an infrequent action. Like, even if you're getting a job every, if you're a contractor and you get a job every couple of months or something, that's still infrequent. And if you're looking for a full-time job, it might be every few years or something. And so what the newsletter allowed us to do was take this infrequent action of making a hire or getting hired and correlate it to kind of like a more frequent way of communicating with people. And I describe it as Costco's chicken strategy. I don't know if you have Costco, it's like a grocery store in Turkey, but they're known for having these chickens in the back that are $5. They're like really good and really inexpensive, and people will go to Costco every day to get the chickens. They put the chickens at the very back of the store. So you have to walk by all the TVs and all the electronics and all the jewelry and all those things to get your chicken. But what that does is it creates a frequent action, which is getting the chicken very often. But it means that whenever you're ready to take that infrequent action, which is buying a new TV or something like that, you're already at Costco and ready to do it. And that was definitely kind of like the strategy with the newsletter, is that it allowed us to take this infrequent action of making a hire, but talk more frequently with people. And whenever they were ready to make a hire, that newsletter would have all of the actions that they needed to take in there. And the community was really more of creating that like frequency of communication. And that this sounds very like strategic. I don't know if we knew that it was going to be this type of strategy when we started the newsletter, but it was just an experiment that worked well. And, we really did genuinely care about helping people get the remote work. I mean, we were really fortunate that, a lot of people were able to transition to remote and get really stable careers through Moonlight. I'm really proud of that.
That's amazing. No, I think it's a great strategy. A lot of people think that newsletter is just something that you do over the month and then you just ship it to people, say, what we achieved. But not a lot of people tend to it as a strategy, right? And as something insightful that can actually be helpful. But let's get back a little bit to what you just said about low code and no code for the MVP for the first stages of this startup. I really like that. When you said that it's easier to iterate, it's easier to make decisions. So at what point do you think it's still wiser to go with code?
There's some businesses that absolutely need to start with code. Like if you're trying to make a developer API or a database or something, it absolutely needs to go with code. One of the things I often tell entrepreneurs when I talk to them is they think that they need to build the product and then sell it. And I think that you can invert that and often sell something that doesn't exist yet. Let's talk about like a previous company I worked on, Staffjoy. It was workforce management, scheduling hourly workers. And, we built this complex product and went out to sell it. But the actual way the sales worked, you make a website, you email people, you request a meeting, you set up a meeting, you do a presentation. Almost no part of that actually included the product. Like you could go through, you could have a website, you could email people, you could try to sell them on it, you could have a sales call, you could have a pitch, all without actually having built the product. And so in some ways, no code can be actually like making the product work. But another way to think of no code can be making sales work before you have the product. And what I think a lot of people find when they try to sell the product before they build it is that it doesn't sell that well. It's hard to do. People don't react well to it. And the reality is, if you build the product, it's not going to change because no one ever saw the product during this entire sales process. There are products that benefit from really high polish. If you're trying to make the next Facebook or something, it'd be hard to do that with low code. But the majority of kind of business to business or prosumer tools, you can definitely try to sell it without actually having the product. So no code can be building a test product, but it can also just be testing the idea without building the product.
Right. So did you at some point transition to code?
Yeah. So we transitioned to code with Moonlight. And as we transitioned to code, we were still having low code parts. So we built the website originally in low code and all the different flows. And then we started to replace the flows piece by piece with code. So we built, for instance, the developer sign up process with code, and the companies was still low code. And then we built developer profiles and we started sending those to companies, but it was still low code on the company side. And then we slowly built out the company side with code. And then, we had the companies and the developers that were coded in the application, but then we had to build invoicing, and we built invoicing coded. So it's kind of this slow progression of building things. And there were parts of the product that remained relatively low code. Like our in-app chat was built primarily on Slack. We found that worked really well. We never built like in-house chat products. Instead, we kind of built on top of Slack.
That's amazing. I think that really also speaks to whatever strategy we're doing, because we believe that, there is Slack, right? It's an amazing chat. So why try to build your own if it's not going to be as good? So just use whatever is there and whatever is super amazing for you. So eventually, you got acquired. Why did you decide to do that? Because acquisition for a lot of founders is a success, but for a lot of founders, acquisition is failure, right? It's your baby, you don't really want to give it up. So eventually you have this FOMO going on. And especially, in this case, you said you sold in December, right?
January.
And then January, right? And then in February, the COVID started, everyone moved home and remote work just boomed. So did you have that feeling?
Yeah, it wasn't the goal to sell the company at that point. One of the issues we had was with getting pricing right. Moonlight, the business model was a marketplace. And you can think of a marketplace as kind of like an agency, but so big that there's not a human from the company on every call. And when Moonlight was smaller, it kind of acted more like an agency and then started to grow. And we tried to automate a lot of things, but at the core of it, it was really hard to enforce the marketplace business model. And so the marketplace business model started as taking like a percent markup on invoices. So if you hire this developer, we add, a fee on top. It was really hard to get companies and developers to pay that fee. And I understand, why companies are hesitant. I don't want to pay extra, but the reality is that that fee is how you acquire that customer for the developer. So it's, whatever money you make in that fee is money you use to go acquire more customers and do outbound sales and buy ads and things like that. And so we just had a trouble pricing it in a way where when there was a really successful match that we made money on it. And that's ultimately what kind of led to the acquisition, was just trouble growing and experimenting with different pricing. What worked really well for Moonlight in the end was definitely a subscription model, kind of focusing on contract to hire. But pricing in a marketplace is really hard. One of the reasons it was hard for Moonlight was we had the low frequency of purchase. We talked about the newsletter and how it's like a low frequency of getting a new job or hiring somebody. And that makes it harder as a marketplace, because when you have less frequent purchases, the value of the marketplace to both sides definitely goes down. You're creating the match, but there's less ongoing value. And the opposite is probably Uber. Like if you're taking an Uber to the airport and you ask your driver, oh, will you come pick me up from the airport? They'll say like, it's not worth my time. I'm going to get so many jobs all the time. I don't need to come back. That's like a high frequency marketplace where they're getting matches, many times per hour, many times per day. And so the value of the platform is there where they're just going to rely on it. And so we were experimenting with different ways to try to create more stickiness within the marketplace, but it was a really hard problem. I think that marketplaces are a very challenging business. And we, at the end of the day, the problem was that we built a very successful platform. I meet people all the time who tell me, oh, I got a job through Moonlight. I'm very happy with my job. Like, you helped me get this job. And then I'll look and say, oh, this company that hired you never paid us.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. That was really honest and amazing. But yeah, let's get to the present. Now you're building a contraption company. Why new business? How did you come up with this, and what does it do?
Yeah. So after I sold Moonlight, I definitely had a period of reflection and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I worked with some later stage companies, for later stage startups, let's say. They weren't publicly traded companies or anything. And I was definitely thinking about what I wanted to do. I heard this described recently as the tunnel. It's as a founder, your identity is tied so closely to your company. And then when you sell the company, your identity you have to rediscover it, because you have to say oh, wow, this company was so close to my identity. Now it's no longer part of my identity. Which parts are genuine to me? And so I think it took me a couple of years kind of exploring to understand more about, what did I want to do? And that the Contraption Company is definitely a reflection of where I think technology is going. So I call it the Contraption Company. It's a product development studio. And our goal is to craft dependable tools that help people work online. So on tools that help people work online, this is something I definitely realized is a focus for me over the past decade. I'm really interested in kind of society's transition to the information age. I look a lot at the industrial age. So when factories were rising, early 20th century and even earlier than that, how things like engines and roads and factories changed work. A lot of the things we take for granted today, including the 40-hour work week and overtime laws and things like that, originated with the industrial age. And I look to the information age, right now, which we're in, and I think there's a lot of parallels to what we can learn from the industrial age. And so I'm really interested in kind of how work continues to change. I think we're applying factory work practices to information age, which isn't a good fit. And so I think a lot about how we can improve that. So that's part of what I focus on, what kind of tools I want to help people with. And I think that we're kind of at the stage where, if you look at the industrial age, we had these large conglomerates, right? Like Standard Oil, and Standard Oil kind of got broken up and definitely changed kind of that area. I think we're kind of at a similar stage with the information age, where we originally were so optimistic about big technology, Facebook and Google and companies like that. We thought we were super optimistic about it. There's definitely been a turn in the last few years where we're less optimistic about big technology. And I think that kind of parallels, like the breakup of Standard Oil in some ways, where people are kind of changing from this optimism to kind of a realism in terms of how they view online work. So I'm really interested in kind of that shift and where things are going. And the way I'm kind of going about solving it is thinking about like dependable software. I think that we have taken a lot of things for free online, but not realized what we were actually selling, which was data and dependability in terms of the software. So if you look at something like Google doesn't typically make money on the individual people using Google. And so they're using the data and selling it to advertisers. So something like Gmail, it seems like a great free tool, but the reason Google does it is because they read all of your emails, even if it's anonymously, right? It's in aggregate. But if you make a purchase from Nordstrom or something, they'll see what you purchased and use that for advertising. It's a whole battle going on in Gmail's inboxes. I don't know if you've noticed, Amazon will no longer put the purchase receipts in the email. And that's because Amazon doesn't want Google to be able to read all of your Amazon purchases through the inbox. The point being that there's a lot of like things that I would call unethical business practices online. Part of it is using people to study them and surveil them to make money. I think also part of it is just a lack of dependability in terms of the software day to day. Like there's so many companies that people love to use, and then they go away after a couple of years. They either shut down or they get acquired and kind of turned off. And so I really have this vision of trying to make the Contraption Company products more dependable by having straightforward business models, by maintaining the products over long periods of time so that if you start using it, it's not going to shut down next week, and trying to make it easier to get human support. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I just want to build software that kind of feels more like a physical tool, like, like a screwdriver, where, you buy it and say, okay, this does something. It's really clear what it does. I paid for it and I know it's going to last a long time. I think that's kind of missing in online software today.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing it, because, I was discussing it. And by the way, can you hear the music?
No.
No. Oh, perfect. Because there's like a whole party going on. So I was discussing it with my colleagues, our topic for today. They were like, okay, that's really interesting, but no idea what dependable software is. And I'm like, okay, so you should come and listen, because when we talked for the first time, I thought it was really interesting, because I think you're right. A lot of companies that people loved just went away, they're no longer there. And I mean, of course, it takes a bit of a learning curve to go from one to another when one goes away from the market. But is it such a bad thing? Maybe isn't it changing for the best?
I think change is good, but the nature of software is that it's expensive to build but cheap to run. So you could say it has high upfront costs and low marginal costs. And so the reality is that once the software is built, it's not like a store where you have to keep it, staffed with like a restaurant, right? You have to staff 30 people to keep it running. The nature of software is that once it's built, there is some ongoing cost to running it, but it's really low. And so I think that some of the change can be good, but the result is that kind of consumers lose their faith in software. I've had this when I go talk to people about things I'm building, and they say, oh, this is cool, but I don't want to like switch my website to this if it's going to shut down in a year. And I think consumers are starting to become skeptical of software online because of that. Like I see that where I say, oh, this, like a good example is a lot of these neobanks. There's a lot of new digital banks coming online. And I think that's definitely a place where consumers will hesitate and say like, okay, I can mess around with photos online or something like that. But, if my bank shuts down and I don't have money, like that's not good. There was a bank, I think it was I don't remember the name of it, but there was one of the consumer banks that kind of shut down unexpectedly in this past year, and kind of was mailing people checks, and people were kind of stranded, not sure what to do because they didn't have the money out of the account yet. The account was turned off, so their bills were not being paid. And I think that's like scary. That's the extreme though, right? But that's people think about that whenever they're signing up for any new piece of software. And what the result is that you'll end up with people kind of trying new software and seeing, oh, that looks cool, but they won't really trust it. And I think that lack of trust makes it really difficult to scale a company and to get people to become paying customers. And part of the dependability is making it continue to be online, but there's also just other ways that companies do things that are not dependable. Like I've seen companies that will raise prices by like 50% on users, and that feels like a shakedown because you've put your trust into the software. Maybe you put your business on this software. You've made a decision, right? You evaluated this software versus that software. You really thought about it. You talked to some people and you made this decision with the software, and you put all your data in it. You start using it. You train everybody on it. And then the prices go up by 50% or 100%. And you're kind of left saying, it's really expensive for me to switch. Like, I think I made the wrong decision, but it's too costly to move off of it right now. And I think that those memories really just like kind of stick with people and are starting to influence buying behavior a lot. So yes, it's good for companies to come and go. I think experimentation is very good, but I think that companies should do a better job of maintaining things for their customers. I think part of that is due to the way companies are often funded, where with the venture capital model, it's either should be really big or it should stop so you can work on something that should be big. And that's neither right nor wrong. I mean, venture capital has produced some really amazing companies and done some really great things. But I think that when companies do okay, but not amazing, it's really hard for them to stick around after kind of a venture capital model. So I'm interested in kind of some other ways of funding companies and things like that, that are available that I think are more conducive to more dependability. And the way I set up my company, I think, is in the name of dependability. If you're kind of doing a traditional Silicon Valley startup, you make a product, you name the company off of the product, and the company is the product. There is no difference. And with the Contraption Company, I've created a distinction between them, where the Contraption Company is kind of this studio model that holds the products. And then within it, it has different products there. So there's Postcard, which is a website builder for kind of personal websites. There's Booklet, which is more of hosted forum software. And because the company is not either one of those products, if the product doesn't work, if no one buys it, I can continue to create that holding company, continue to maintain the products that do work. And so it's not like if the product fails, I have to shut down the entire company. So if the product fails, the company is still there and the products can continue to be existing there.
Right. Oh, that's something that we also have to deal with. It's a very pressing question for everybody when they come to build on Mars or any other platform. I think too, they ask, what do I do if you guys go away in 2 years? And yeah, we definitely have to answer that question quite a lot. So I understand what you mean. So how do you decide what products you get to build?
That's a really good question. I think that it's a blend, right? There's coming up with cool ideas, and then there's having to look at those ideas and think about what makes the most sense to build. So there's creative energy, and then there's also kind of rational, analytic energy that goes into it. Postcard and Booklet were both products I wanted to exist in the world for me. So that's definitely one great way to kind of start building a project, is if you know that you want to build it and use it for yourself. So Postcard is an easy way to make a personal website and newsletter. I wanted to get off of social media more during the pandemic. I deleted all of my Facebook products, mostly got off of like Twitter. And I thought that I wanted to have more of a calmer way to communicate with people. And so I started building a newsletter. And the thing I realized was, a newsletter is just in the email inbox. And like you were saying, a lot of people don't hang out in their email inbox.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to make it also like a website so that when I wrote something, it went to email, but I could also share it on like as link. That's kind of where
like
Postcard started.
Substack, right?
Yeah, it's diverging more as it goes on. Postcard is really focused on personal websites. It's not trying to be businesses, it's not trying to be brands, and it's not trying to cater to kind of professional writing. I think blogs can feel very permanent, where you're writing an essay that will exist forever. And the idea of Postcard is that it's really supposed to be lighter weight. You're going to see some new features coming out in the coming weeks that make it easier to kind of control the privacy of different posts and things, that they feel more ephemeral, like less permanent. Postcard was an example where I started building it for myself, and I said, this is exactly what I want. And then I started selling it to other people too, and it's resonated, which seems to be good. Booklet was an example of that too, where I was building something that I wanted for myself. And even Moonlight in some ways was a product I was building for myself. I wanted to be able to hire engineers that way. And I was also like one of the first developers on the platform as I was building it. So that's one definitely good way to do it. But what's harder is like there are things that are rational business decisions. Like, for example, with Postcard, Twitter has a newsletter product called Revue, Revue, and they're shutting it down. Not dependable software, right? And so there's a lot of people that are looking for a replacement for Revue. And that's a thing where, I don't need that. I don't need to import things off of Revue. I'm not building that for myself, but it's really like a rational business decision, right? It's like people are looking for a new home for their data and for their products. So that's, something I'm building right now, the ability to import Revue sites into Postcard that isn't just, what I want to build. So to kind of bring it back, what I'm trying lately is I try to split my time, like half time kind of doing things that I think are really creative and energy kind of creating for me, like building new features that I really want to see in the products. And I think the other time, half of the time about is doing things that are more analytical, kind of business focused, like, okay, like this, we need to work on the sign up flow for people that come from Revue. So getting back to your question, like how do you decide what to build? Like the products themselves, a lot of it so far has been things that I want to see in the world. And I am seeing new products I want to build that are not necessarily me as the first customer. And for that, I just have to kind of break down my time into things that I find creative versus things that I find more like rational business opportunities.
Right. And it's great that you, sorry, I'm missing some of the words because the music is so loud.
Sounds like a party then.
Yeah, it is a party. I'm like the only one not there. But yeah, that's my personal decision. But yeah, anyway, it's great that you mentioned how, you saw the trend, you saw that Twitter was going away from Revue, and you decided to build this as a new feature, right? So this has a lot to do with like dealing with trends, seeing what's out there. How do you stay on top of it? And I guess another like layer to this question is a lot of other founders say that customers are also very helpful in making decisions, what gets to be built. So what part do customers play in your business?
Yeah, that's a good question. In terms of spotting trends, it kind of gets back to what I was saying earlier, which is as a entrepreneur, you're kind of having to picture the future a little bit. And sometimes you can be a little bit early with that. So like with Postcard, I really envision kind of a future where social media is no longer so dominant, like where there's not this monolithic social network that kind of everyone is a part of. And I think that that's kind of the direction we're heading. But we're not there yet, right? Like people are still using a lot of social media. I do think that we're going to decrease that usage in the future, but I'm having to reconcile that with consumer behavior today, which is people are using social media. So like one of the things that Postcard does to bridge the two is when you share a post, I put a lot of effort into these things called open graph images. So this is something where if you share your website on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, or anything like that, the social networks will ask the website, what image should I put here? And also some other data. And I put a lot of effort into making like a really good image that is dynamic. It'll show the name of your post, the name of your website, your photo, which was difficult. But if you think about Postcard, my vision for the future is, I don't think we'll be on social media as much, but I built all of these features that are really specific to social media. And so it's hard to predict the future, and you have to kind of balance, what do I think the future will be? I want to be working towards that, but also remembering how consumer behavior is today, and adapting for that. For example, another good example is electric cars, right? There were people who said, we're going to have electric cars in the future. We're going to build charging stations for electric cars, right? And that's like a rational business decision, but it's hard because you're having to think very much in the future. So I think that's a thing for entrepreneurs, is timing is really difficult to get right. I don't know if I have any good advice there, except that if you can really keep in mind a way to bridge today and the future you're going to, it can be really helpful. And what can be difficult is if you, getting to the customer's question, starting to get there, if you have this vision for the future, like for Postcard, it's less social media use, more personal newsletters. What can be difficult is you can show it to customers and ask them what the product does, and they might say, oh yeah, I think this is a different thing. Like, this is how I would use it today. And it's difficult because as an entrepreneur, sometimes you have to change people's behavior. And so like with Postcard, right, it's newsletter, website, trying to replace some of these social media networks with this newsletter flow. And some of the early user testing, I would show it to people and they'd say, oh, I don't know if I want the newsletter side. I just want a website, which is one way to use Postcard. And I started thinking, oh, maybe I should change the website. Instead of saying it's a newsletter, it's more of like a personal website only. And I realized over time that kind of diluted the product. And people who believed in my vision of the future weren't finding it anymore. And so that's a difficult thing to balance between how people behave today and your vision of the future, because part of it is you'll listen to customers and they won't necessarily tell you that that's what they want. And so you do need to have some confidence in your vision of the future that behavior will change over time. For instance, with remote work, with Moonlight, we had this vision of remote work in the future. We were telling people you should hire remotes, and they'd say, we don't want remotes. And there was a lot of pressure to say, let's stop doing remote work and just do on-site jobs with Moonlight. And little did we know, 2020 would come and a lot of work would go remote. And that was a place where maintaining that vision of the future was important for kind of making it a differentiated site. Because if we made it the same as everybody else today, it would no longer be differentiated. So that's difficult as an entrepreneur, to reconcile your vision of the future and how to get people to change their behavior to do that. And in terms of talking to customers, yeah, I think it's very important. With Postcard, I talked to dozens of people. I would watch them use the product and sign up. Some of this was in person, some of it was over Zoom. And I think that there's really value to qualitative user interviews a lot, because one of the things you'll find is that people blame themselves often when they have trouble with software, and they won't tell you that it's something you should fix. So for instance, with Postcard, there were some buttons that were in weird places or something like that. When I was testing the software, people would sign up and say, oh, I messed up. I'm sorry, I messed up. And you would watch it and say like, no, this is my fault. I designed it bad. But no one is going to blame the company necessarily for a bad design. And so user testing is just incredibly valuable for finding things, because these were cases where people would never tell me, oh, Philip, this button doesn't make sense or the label's weird. They would just blame themselves and say, oh, I don't understand how it works. And so that user testing is incredibly valuable.
Okay, well, I'm on Postcard. Haven't used like all of it yet. Can't find the time, but I really like the idea because, like you said, yeah, we do use social media. I tend to use it way less now, and I'm also trying to find software or tools that would allow me to do that without breaking too much of my routine. Yeah, another thing that I wanted to ask is about you, right? You're a serial entrepreneur. Why?
Yeah.
I think it's a big question. Like, how do you become an entrepreneur, and what's your what drives you the most to it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I have a great answer, except that I just really enjoy building things. I One of the reasons I think I like the Contraption Company and building it is as people start to advance in their careers, they end up with this kind of fork in the road where they can either go into kind of like a leadership route and become like a manager or a vice president or something like that, or they can kind of go different routes where they pursue more flexibility and autonomy. And for me, I think I saw that path where I could have continued to be like an engineering manager or, head of product or something like that. And I realized I just didn't like that lifestyle. I didn't like, 40 hours per week of meetings. I didn't like having to work on other people's ideas or having to convince people of things all the time. And so for me, I chose to go more of this path that gives me flexibility. I like being able to work on my own projects. I like the physical flexibility. Like I travel a lot. I'm able to see a lot of different places because I get to work on my own projects. And I think that it's like less financially rewarding. Like I look at my, entire career, and if I had just gone to a very big company at the age of 22 out of college, it probably would have been better for me, like as a financial decision. But I think this is less of a financial decision and more of like a lifestyle decision. One of my favorite podcasts is Cal Newport's Deep Questions. He's a computer science professor who writes a lot about online work and focused work and increasingly kind of lifestyle planning. And I think for me, I really valued more flexibility, autonomy, and being able to work on things that I cared about. And another big part of it was focusing on my craft of building products. I think the way a lot of technology leadership works is that the more you advance in management, the less you actually build products. And that to me sounded sad. Like I really enjoy building products. Like I don't just do it for like extrinsic reward. Like I do enjoy building things day to day. And so for me, entrepreneurship is a way to pursue the values that I care about in life, which are more craft and flexibility and autonomy.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And
Yeah.
did I read it right, or were you a guest at that podcast recently?
Yeah, it was a guest caller. That was fun. It was
Yeah. See, I read
good
your
experience.
postcard. So yeah, that's great. So what has been the biggest win and the biggest failure so far for you
Ever, or
personally
for
as an entrepreneur, or maybe for a Contraption Company, if let's talk
yeah.
present.
In terms of a win, I launched Postcard last month. So this was kind of like the first product launch out of the Contraption Company, and it went extremely well. I was happy that it took off on Product Hunt and on Hacker News. I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but it was tens of thousands of people visited Postcard, and that was great. I think that I'm kind of in the stage where there's like Postcard is not a successful company right now yet. It's still like a very early product. Still has an early number of users. But what that launch really showed me is that this is something people care about. And it did give me, some customers and some users, which is very positive. So that was definitely a big win, because until you launch, you never really know, right? So it's better to launch and see, do people really want this? And if I had launched and nobody had used it, another 3 or 6 months of refining probably wouldn't have helped, right? This gets back to like your low code questions. It's like, it's really hard to, you can't necessarily just improve the product to get people to care about it. You have to have good positioning and good websites that convey why people should care about it, not just what you do. So that was a big win, being able to just see that people cared about Postcard, that it was really positively received. And I think that Hacker News, which is where I launched it primarily and got a lot of the traffic, is more of an early adopter community. And I think that they kind of fit into my idea of needing to change behavior for the future. So if I can get early adopters to care about this, then there's more potential to kind of go to the early majority and kind of other people in the future. So that was really a positive experience. In terms of lows, I don't know. It's really been kind of general. I don't try to remember the lows too much. I think that
That's good.
I mean, it's all things considered, it hasn't really been that horrible. I think that one of the things that was very stressful for me with startups when we raised venture capital was needing to grow to a particular level. So if you're trying to raise seed capital, you want to hit, call it $10,000 per month in recurring revenue. And if you want to raise a Series A, you want to have $100,000 per month in recurring revenue. And it kind of ladders up. And every time you take money, you kind of need to achieve this next goal because you kind of promise someone something. You promise an investor, I'm going to get to this level. And that's really stressful. I think that when you're in a company and you raise money, a lot of the stress can come from needing to live up to the promises that you've made, which is really a challenging thing psychologically. And I think that I've avoided a lot of that with the Contraption Company by not promising anybody anything, except dependability, which I can fulfill on. That I can fulfill on. But I haven't promised anybody that, the product has to reach this much money or it'll get shut down. And that I think has been a positive thing. I'm avoiding a failure from previous companies by not needing to achieve a particular goal for the company to continue to exist. So that's been also like another positive part here.
That's a very interesting point. Thank you for bringing it up. And what would be the best advice from you to the first-time founders?
I think that what I talked about earlier with not needing to build the product to see if people want it. To have a successful company, you need to have something that people want, right? And so that means people need to want it, and you need to build something that fulfills that need. And I think people worry a lot about building something that fulfills that need before they figure out if people actually want it. And so my general advice is always to just test it with people, see if they want it. Money, asking for money before you've built something is a neutral indicator of whether people really care about it. So just try selling it before you built it, put up a website, make a mailing list, and launch it somewhere like Product Hunt and see if people sign up, because you're not going to, like, you don't want to waste all of your time building something if nobody wants it.
Right. Thank you. I think it's a good one. It's kind of like you said, it's at the top of my head as well, right? It's everywhere, but again, somehow not enough for people to listen or to take in. But I think it's great to still mention it. And one more question would be, who inspires you, and who would you want to see here at the podcast next?
Who inspires me? I think that I keep a list of people that inspire me.
Awesome.
in Notion, which I like. A lot of it tends to be writers. I think that I kind of analogize building products to like writing books. And so I really enjoy reading memoirs by writers. Like Haruki Murakami has a new memoir out that I'm really enjoying. He's a Japanese writer. It's very successful there. And I really like his discussions of creativity and writer's block and building things. And I think a lot of that can feel similar to building products, where you're having to have this vision, you're having to deliver on it, you're having to refine it and go through this editing process. And it can be a very like lonely solo endeavor as you're building it. So that's definitely who inspires me, a lot of authors. In terms of who I think would be good on the podcast, there's a lot of really interesting products coming out around AI. I think that there are some good tools that are coming out here. I have a lot of friends who are working on products that are not launched yet. I don't want to necessarily mention them, but artificial intelligence used to be very academic, where you needed to know math and computers really intimately to be able to do anything interesting. And we've reached this point now where artificial intelligence is becoming way more accessible. If you see OpenAI, ChatGPT, things like that, where there's something called the adjacent possible. So like now that we have these tools, there's so many different things you can do with them, and people are using them in really creative ways. So I think we're going to see a lot of applications of AI that are interesting. And what I think people don't necessarily realize is it's going to hit no code really quickly. Like there's a lot of low code tools that are going to come out that are powered by AI or that leverage AI or that let you integrate with AI. And I think that that's going to be like a huge explosion of creativity within the space. And so I think that, talking to people that are working with AI is a huge opportunity right now. There's so many things that are happening, and there's a whole emerging field of writing prompts for AI.
Yeah.
So there's a really cool website I'd point people to called Prompt Hunt, PROMPT hunt.com, which is like Product Hunt, but instead of submitting products that you build, you can submit like prompts that go into AI, and you can start to see how people are writing the inputs for AI to generate like images and things like that. So being able to get good at writing prompts is not code. It doesn't take coding skills. And it's something that like a lot of people could learn if they're, if you're using low code, you can learn to write prompts for AI. And I think that's going to be a unique skill in the future that's going to become increasingly important.
All right, 100% agree. 100% agree. When I saw the all the posts about, oh my God, AI is taking our jobs, I thought, no, I mean, you can use it in so many ways. Just learn how to deal with it. Like learn how to write the questions. Like give it the right examples. I think it's just so exciting. And on the earlier note about a lot of low-code platforms integrating with AI, we did it. If you want to take a
cool.
look, yeah, and it looks pretty amazing. I mean, I'm not a technical person, but it does look cool. You just say, hey, I want to clone Airbnb, and it says, okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's absolutely mind-blowing. So thank you for sharing the thoughts about it. Well, Philip, it's been amazing talking to you. I mean, the hour went too fast, and honestly, I was missing the party too much. But thank you so much for being here, and thank you for making the time and during the holidays.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and I hope you enjoy your party.
Thank you. All right, take care.